All right, members of the audience, looks like we might be walking into hell with this one, maybe even further still, because we're going to be discussing kind of the Starmer op-ed in the Sunday Telegraph. And I think this has gotten a lot of backlash because he has been seen to praise Thatcher, which I'm not. He is. You can read it either way. I think, to be honest with you, it's not blatant praise, but when you put her kind of, no, it's not praise. I can't square the circle. I'm trying to think, like, to be charitable to people and say, like, putting her in the same bracket as kind of Clement Attlee, a guy who did change the economy, change the country for the better, I think, and also Tony Blair, who did a lot of good things and some bad things. Let's be honest, some really bad things, not just kind of internationally, where I think he did the real damage, but also domestically. He talks about meaningful change. So every moment of meaningful change in modern British politics begins with the realization that politics must act in the service of British people. I would have said politicians must act in the service of British people. So rather than dictating them, Margaret Thatcher sought to drag Britain out of its stupor by setting loose our natural entrepreneurialism, word I cannot say. And, she privatised stuff. Let's be honest. She privatised stuff, and it was not good. It's not good. Then he talks about Tony Blair reimagined a stale, outdated Labour Party into one that could seize the optimism of the late 90s. And he obviously, he was kind of a legacy, I think, of Thatcher. And I think Thatcher talks about that. One of her greatest achievements is Tony Blair. So not great. And then he talks about the one who actually did deserve praise, which is Clement Attlee, wrote that Labour must be a party of duty and patriotism, not abstract theory, to build a new Jerusalem. But, it wasn't based on abstract theory. It's based on, I think, Keynesian economics in terms of the economic policy, I think, and also the fact that, he built things like the NHS, they changed the kind of theories on poverty. I think the Roundtree surveys that they did really showed that people aren't poor because they spend all their money on cigarettes and beer. People are poor because they don't get paid enough. That was one of the things that I think fundamentally changed some of the views with people, especially some of the ones in the Labour Party. So, again, to put Clement Attlee in the same paragraph as the other two, I think they don't fit, especially with Thatcher. Now, can you read this as praise of Thatcher? I think to an extent, yes. But, I think there is, and I didn't grow up in the Thatcher era, so there isn't this kind of, I don't have that visceral hatred of Thatcher like other people do, or kind of certain Northerners do either, or Scottish people or Welsh people, because I didn't grow up in that era, so I couldn't tell you for sure. But, there's been a lot of backlash over this. And Starmer's kind of comments the next day after this article came out is interesting. He's trying to appeal to Tory voters, but again, politics, you can't abandon your base. One of the reasons why Boris Johnson got that big majority was because not only did he hold on to his base through his own policies of get Brexit done and a few other things, he went for the other voters. He did both, which is something that's very hard to do. We saw Hillary Clinton fail on that in the 2016 election, but we saw Donald Trump actually do it very successfully. He held on to the Republican base and traditional Republican voters, but also took some Democratic voters in the Rust Belt, and that is how he won the presidency. So it's a very risky strategy to do. So Hamza Yusuf was very critical of Starmer, saying the article was an insult to communities in Scotland affected by her economic vandalism. Because I think when you talk about someone as divisive as Thatcher and someone who did as much damage as Thatcher, I think to kind of not give her criticism is a disservice to what she did, I think, to this country. Because by saying, she kind of unleashed our natural entrepreneurialism, I think that is a compliment. In a sense. I don't know. It's hard to... I think that one's a personal opinion one. I think you could read that either way, and I think it'd be fair to read that either way. Maybe I'm rambling a bit. But Starmer said, in his comments to BBC Radio 4, he said, quote, "The point I'm making in the article really is that you can distinguish political leaders, certainly in the post-war period, into those who had a plan and those who drifted essentially. And that's why I referenced Attlee, who obviously had a strong plan, the New Jerusalem, Tony Blair, who captured the optimism of the late 90s, and Thatcher, who did have a plan for entrepreneurialism, had a mission. It doesn't mean I agree with what she did, but I don't think anyone could suggest she didn't have a driving sense of purpose," end quote. And she did have a driving sense of purpose. Like, all of these three people have something in common, which is they sought to kind of reshape the country. But the problem is, when you reference these three people and include yourself in that, you have to have a vision. That's the most criticism I have of this situation. You can't talk about these leaders who had big visions and kind of try to change the country, and then also not have a vision for yourself. he doesn't have it. He can draw that parallel with Tony Blair of moving the party to the right, making a manifesto that's more kind of Tory bomb-proof. But, there were still massive amounts of poverty under Tony Blair, which should have been eradicated. Absolutely should have been eradicated in that time, but just wasn't. And it's a massive failure, in my opinion, of the new Labour Party under Tony Blair. He says, quote, and the reason I referenced all three of them is because we've drifted as a country the last 13 years. We've declined as a country in the 13 years, and the characteristics of an incoming Labour government, if we're privileged enough to come in and to serve, will be this mission, this sense of having a plan that we're operating to, a sense of driving purpose, end quote. And, that kind of point there, it doesn't make sense when you don't have a plan. We haven't seen a plan. There's not much that's being published. That's the problem I have. And if you look at the three commonalities between these three leaders, right, Attlee, Thatcher and Blair, they were coming in essentially after taking over power from a different party, right? So Attlee beat the Churchill party, the Churchill Conservative Party. Thatcher beat the Labour Party, and Tony Blair obviously beat the Conservative Party, the major government at the time. So that's the commonality those three have, and I think he's trying to draw a parallel with that, saying we can be the ones to beat the Tories. He says, quote, and the reason I mentioned that bit, Starmer went on to say he has fundamentally changed Labour compared to 2019, which, again, there's massive anti-Semitism within the party. There was a problem with anti-Semitism and racism, I think, under Jeremy Corbyn. There is still a problem with racism under Keir Starmer. So I don't know how much he's actually changed the party in that sense. I'll be honest. He added, he said, quote, what I say to those many people who voted in the past is if you believe in not just fixing your country, but renewing it and taking it forward, if you want to be part of the national project that will take our country forward, build our economy in the way we want, build our security, make sure we take advantage of the transition that comes with the energy transition when the Labour Party is the party for you, end quote. And I think that's what he's trying to do, appeal to those kind of long-term Tory voters and say, we're cool, I guess. I don't know. It doesn't make sense. I think he's kind of done this interview in the midst of just taking massive backlash. And it goes to show you, not just in interviews does this guy suck. He also sucks writing op-eds, because he wrote this piece. He wrote it. He would have had someone run through it. For him to praise Thatcher when there's such visceral hatred of her amongst, I think, Labour voters and kind of certain other communities in the country, it doesn't make sense, and I just don't get it. Starmer was told by the presenter by saying such things, including about Thatcher and his stance on Israel bombardment of Palestine, he has left some Labour voters feeling unrepresented. He replied, quote, my focus, whether it's on the renewal that our country needs or the resolution of the awful situation in Israel and Gaza, is not the Labour Party members and the Labour Party movement, end quote. And again, this is such a weird statement to make. It's not the Labour, is not on the Labour members or the party, that's just such a bizarre statement to make. So I'm struggling to read right now. It's such a bizarre statement to make. If the Labour Party come into power, you would expect them to make statements, to try and do something at least to help resolve the conflict between Israel and Hamas. If it's the case that it's not on Labour to do that, why did you make so many statements condemning Vladimir Putin? If that's the case, it's not on the Labour Party, the Labour movement to deal with that. It doesn't make sense. And, kind of the other kind of stupid statements he makes is, quote, we've spent a decade before I became leader obsessing about our membership and having discussions with ourselves. My change of the Labour Party means we've turned inside out and we face the voters and face the country, end quote. And okay, you're facing the voters, and what are you learning? Because most of the voters are pro-EU, you've ignored that. I don't think most of the voters in the country want to go back to austerity. So again, what are you talking about? And this idea that they've been obsessing about the membership, that's not even true for a decade. Because under Ed Miliband, they ran very much a centre-left campaign and they lost. So this argument of they listened to the membership for over a decade is simply untrue. And we go on to our regular genius of the week. This is from Stephen Flynn saying, "I'm not the leader of the Labour Party praising Thatcher is bleak for all those hoping for change. It does again raise the question as to whether Labour in Scotland agree with the Westminster boss." And obviously Stephen Flynn taking this as an easy attack line. Do I think Starmer was praising Thatcher? I can read it either way, but I don't think he was. I'll be honest. And, Flynn's letter reads, "Dear Anas, do you agree with Starmer that Thatcher brought, quote, meaningful change and, quote, set loose our natural entrepreneurialism, end quote. I look forward to hearing from you." And so I think it's an obvious attack line, but, Phil going absolutely ape over this, saying, if you're saying she didn't change things, then what's your beef? Also, Starmer didn't say she let loose our natural entrepreneurialism. Is that all you have left, aping right-wing billionaire-owned papers and hoping your followers don't read? So let's go back to this. Do you know what? We can find the exact wording here. So, loose our natural entrepreneurialism. Let's see if those are the exact words he used. Oh, it's right there. So, for Phil to kind of come out and make that statement, and especially when he comes out and says, "I'm hoping your followers didn't read the article," maybe my man didn't read the article, because it's there. It's right there. So I don't know what version of the article he read, but maybe it's the same version that said the UK can rejoin the single market. Femi was going a bit crazy over this as well.
Keir Starmer, the leader of the Labour Party, the progressive party in the UK, praising Margaret Thatcher, the Conservative Prime Minister from the 1970s, is more insane than people are giving it credit for. Because think about how Keir Starmer got that job to begin with. Keir Starmer took over from Jeremy Corbyn after Labour suffered the worst election defeat since 1935. The Tories achieved that election victory on a Get Brexit Done manifesto and a promise to level up the poorer parts of the UK. And as a lot of research shows, the Brexit vote was largely driven by anger in the financially neglected parts of the UK because those areas never got any investment and were deindustrialised by Margaret Thatcher.
And that's why the whole levelling up thing was a joke, because this is the party that levelled down the country. So, for them to believe that Boris Johnson was going to level up their parts, to look after the forgotten communities, was absolute nonsense.
This is what I was told when I went to Sunderland and spoke to community organiser Stephen France.
The Brexit problem can still be traced back to the lack of investment from the 80s. With Margaret Thatcher. Yeah. This has been a build-up.
So the Tories used the anger against regional inequality to get people to vote for Brexit, then to get people to vote for them, which ultimately led to Keir Starmer becoming the leader of the Labour Party. And now Keir Starmer is supporting Brexit in order to try and win back the votes of people who voted Brexit as a rebellion against Thatcher's policies, yet he's now publicly...
And this is becoming like Carol from HR.
Praising Margaret Thatcher. UK politics is on acid.
And he is right. I can see his frustration, but again, I think it depends on if you read it as praise for Thatcher, which I don't, but I can see why people would. And for him to kind of, put Thatcher in that sentence, I get he's trying to appeal to Tory voters, but, this whole idea that Starmer's carrying a Ming Vase strategy completely falls apart when you see him kind of openly trying to court Tory voters so brazenly that it's kind of, I think, pushing away some traditional Labour members and potentially some Labour voters. The whole strategy they've gone for on Gaza has completely backfired, where you've got mass resignations from the party, not just shadow frontbenchers, but also councillors. And you're going to run into a situation where these people may not vote for the Labour Party. Who they vote for, I don't know. But you are running into a situation where you're losing voters in exchange for trying to win voters in other areas. And again, that strategy did not work for Hillary Clinton. It probably will work this time out for Starmer, because the Tories have botched it so badly. But when it comes to that second election, I cannot see them. I can see them struggling. I'll be honest. They might win it with a very slim majority, but I can see them struggling a lot. And I did find this interview very interesting from LBC, where they interview one of, I think it was a civil servant under Thatcher.
Her vision, and it is certainly true that she did change Britain, and in fact I think her legacy is actually lasting. I think lasted too long in my view.
And I think it's still lasting to this day, really, the idea of privatisation, shrinking the state and all of these things. I'd argue Thatcher's legacy, Thatcher might have one of the longest running legacies out of most British prime ministers.
Her vision of a sort of efficient state, a much smaller state, where you kind of cut back on the state in order to unlock that entrepreneurialism. I think that's very much the vision of the modern Conservative Party. Low tax,
highest tax burden since World War II, but, okay.
Small state. And, it's time actually for a change. So I would agree that she did change things. And I would agree that it is time for a change, which I think were the two fundamental aspects of his argument.
It's an interesting person for him to align himself with, even if it is just in one sentence, given the fact that she is a very divisive character, especially amongst Labour voters. What are your reflections on that?
I mean, I've never seen a Prime Minister where they celebrated her death. I don't think I've ever seen or heard of that before, I'll be honest.
Absolutely. I mean, I've written a book about Margaret Thatcher, about the last 18 months where I worked for her, and I've always gone to great lengths to show to demonstrate that I wasn't a political supporter. I was a civil servant, because she's such an enormously divisive figure, especially in the north of England, and in Scotland
And Wales.
In Wales, where she destroyed whole communities and didn't really put anything else in its place. But I have
and
to
that
say,
was one of the key problems. When you talk about meaningful change, yeah, the change was meaningfully bad for a lot of these communities. And I think I don't know why Starmer kind of put those three together, because I think domestically Tony Blair did more good than bad. It'd be hard to argue against that. I think Clement Attlee fundamentally did more good than bad. Thatcher arguably did way more bad than good. So I just putting those three together, it doesn't sit right with me.
Having seen her close to, and seeing the changes that she did make, even though I didn't agree with all of them, I do think that she actually demonstrated that one person can make a massive change in our politics, and I think that was certainly true of Clement Attlee, who was also mentioned. It is a very divisive thing to do. I'm not so surprised, because I couldn't help but notice that Rachel Reeves in her conference speech was sort of talking about ironclad discipline.
Starmer being called, when they talked about ironclad discipline, Keir Starmer is economically illiterate, and the other person who's pushing this same nonsense is also Rachel Reeves. So by extension, I think Stephanie Cheltenham would probably say Rachel Reeves is probably economically illiterate in the stuff she is pushing. So a bit tragic that.
Being quite Thatcherist, Thatcherite really, in her tone. And I think that, I can see why he's doing it. But I'd like to see him portraying himself as somebody with a new vision and the real determination to make that new vision stick.
That's a really interesting point there, because we haven't seen that. He's mentioned people that did fundamentally change the country. Starmer hasn't actually mentioned what his vision is, and that's one of the most frustrating things. And I think this is a good interview. If you guys have the time, or guys and gals, or people in the audience have the time to listen to all of this, I would recommend it. I think it's quite an interesting conversation. So credit Caroline Slowcock and Sangeeta for this one. So mention that. I did find this statement from Phil very ironic.
Wrote the headline, "This is why people's lives are knackered. They believe untrustworthy people without question, as long as it feeds their prejudices. I work on the basis of being more suspicious of claims that chime with my beliefs."
So, again, and he was right on this. He was actually, a lot of the stuff he said was right, when he said that this isn't actually praise of Thatcher. But then you go back to this tweet here where he says, Starmer didn't say she let loose our natural entrepreneurism, when literally he said that. So I don't get what bro's talking about. You can't say, are you relying on people not to read the article, and then say Starmer didn't say something in the article which he did. It's just bizarro world, honestly. By setting loose our, I guess you know what, actually he might have got him there, because if we look at this, oops, I've opened Fruit Loops by mistake. If you look at this bit, right? Oops, bear with me. Absolutely having a meltdown here. So, because he should have used quotation marks, really. Phil should have in this tweet, but this isn't an English essay. We can give him a pass on it. This doesn't actually come up, because it's not exactly what she said. So, technically, Phil is actually right in the worst way possible, which is the pedantic gotcha way, because he never said let loose our natural entrepreneurialism, which is true, but Starmer did say Margaret Thatcher sought to drag Britain out of its stupor by setting loose our natural entrepreneurialism. So it's a slight misquote. I think it's a slight misquote. So Phil's technically right here, but again, he's trying to play a pedantic game if he is right. So again, it's not really the win. It's a very hollow win, I guess. I'm just going to close this because it's going to drive me nuts. So yeah, I think he did really well up until this tweet, and I think it rattled him a bit, seeing as some people think Labour can actually do well and win seats in Scotland, which if my man's writing articles like this, it's not going to go down like that. Definitely not. Thatcher, the milk snatcher. That's the only thing I know about Thatcher, because that's all people say about her. But anyways, I'm going to leave it there. Let me know what you think in the comments below. Like, comment, share, subscribe. Respect to Phil to a minor extent for actually having some nuance in the conversation, but then to kind of moan at people for not reading the article and just going off headlines when, a bit that is basically quoted in the article and say it's not there is to be very pedantic. So I think that's an L for Phil. It's kind of an L for Stephen Flynn for not writing this out properly. An L for Starmer, because he should have doubled down on. I think he should have doubled down on this and say, look, I wasn't praising her, but she did create, fundamental change. But it was not, good for the communities in the north of England specifically, or Scotland or Wales, and that's something that I will obviously look to rectify. But anyways, I'm gonna leave it there. Let me know what you think in the comments below. Like, comment, share, subscribe. And it looks like the internet and a lot of the social media people are smoking that Sunak pack. That Starmer pack, and I'll catch you in the next one.